The Honourable Shane Mallard.
Thank you, Mr President. I rise to speak on the motion today moved by the Honourable Ben Franklin and note the importance of this motion for members of this place and thank him for bringing it to the House. Anzac Day is a solemn day of remembrance across our communities where we gather to commemorate this sacred day when the young men of our country, their deeds and sacrifices showed the world that Australia was truly emerging as a nation. On this day we remember their sacrifice and mourn them with pride. We take strength from the certain knowledge that our young Australians today and into the future will never forget the examples set by their forebears. Anzac Day is commemorated across the nation in communities from country towns to cities. It was a great honour for me to represent Minister Stuart Ayres on Anzac Day services in Penrith, as he had the honour of being in France for the commemorations there. I represent Minister Ayres at Penrith, at Emu Plains and Glenbrook this year on Anzac Day, and as a Penrith boy myself, I recall being part of many Anzac Day services in my school years in Penrith. And in fact, I did wonder on Anzac Day what had become of the obelisk and the memorial at Castlereagh Upper Public School, which was closed back in the early 80s or late 70s. But as a student, I remember us looking after that obelisk in the school playground. But more importantly, in the school classroom, which is about as similar size to this chamber, which was a one-teacher school, so the infants faced one direction and the primary school faced the other, and one teacher ran from end to end to teach us. Fond memories of that school. There were memorial boards on the wall, right over our shoulder as we worked every day in the classroom with asterisks, telling us the young men who had served in the Great War from the rural community of Castlereagh. The community doesn't exist anymore because the late scheme and urban development has swallowed it up. And the school is still there as a building, but sadly there's no service at the obelisk. But I did pop along on Anzac Day to pay my respects to that one as well. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank those who organised the Anzac Day events that I attended this year. The City of Penrith RSL sub-branch, which is a mighty sub-branch in Western Sydney, the President, Mr Mick McConnell, and the Vice Presidents, Brian Cartwright and Peter Todd. They organised a dawn service on Anzac Day, but also a very well-attended service at Memory Park in the heart of Penrith a few days earlier, with about 500 representatives of the local schools there, and also a military contingent from the local military establishments. On Anzac Day, I attended the Blackstone Glenbrook RSL sub-branch service at Glenbrook RSL. Those of you who know the Blue Mountains through the highway, it's on the right-hand side there at Glenbrook. And that was a pretty impressive service, the first one I've been to there. Very large organised service, very well organised service. A march with a military contingent, of course, from the RAF base, the RAF headquarters around the corner, and a lot of veterans there. And around about 1,000 people attended that service. And we particularly focused on the 100-year anniversary of Villers-Bretonneux, the battle there. There was amazingly the French flag flying, the New Zealand flag flying, and the Australian flag flying from the mast in the RSL club. And we sang each of the national anthems. It was a very moving ceremony, that one. The Emu Plains Guide Association is a different type of service. This one's taken off in recent years. That's at the park there. I think it's called Duke Oval, and the park there on the old highway at Emu Plains. And there were a good 500 or 600 students there. Not many veterans, but students, young people from the local schools. We did a service at the Guides Hall and then crossed the road to the obelisk there at the Oval. And it was a very moving service there as well. Big crowd, very much a community crowd as opposed to people from the military. So it's a different type of service, and I really acknowledge that. Now, each year that passes during this centenary period, we acknowledge anniversary milestones from the Great War. And as I've spoken about before, in this place, this solemn day allows me to reflect upon my family's own service, of course. And as I have mentioned to the House before, my great uncle Frank Farrer, from Badger's Creek, the only brother of my grandfather, enlisted at the age of 21 in 1917. he enlisted at Liverpool, and Frank was killed by shelling at Peronne in the big push in the Battle of the Somme in France, on the Western Front, on September the 5th, 1918. That's 1 year after enlisting at Liverpool, but if members like to think about that date, it's tragically only 6 weeks before the armistice that he was lost. Of course, the great General Monash was overall commander there. Like many families, my family have lived through the generations with an ever-present sense of loss about Great Uncle Frank, but also pride in his service to the country. And only in recent years did I discover that a portrait of a well-won soldier that hung in the living room of the house at Badgerys Creek, which I had assumed was Uncle Frank, wasn't Uncle Frank because there was no portrait of Uncle Frank, no photograph of Uncle Frank, and that was a symbolic picture that's been put there by the family many years ago to symbolise Uncle Frank's presence, and it was something I only found out after we, the house was sold and things were dispersed. But military service in my family continued. My grandfather, Bruce Peterson, served in the militia in Kokoda in Papua New Guinea, and he was wounded there. They were sent there first to hold back the Japanese and did a noble job, under-resourced, under-trained and not very well led until the AIF were diverted to there. He came back a tragically changed man, and even now it's too raw to talk about what that meant to my family and why for a long time Anzac Day was actually a difficult day for me as a young man. My sister Michelle continued the service. She went into the army, of course in a period of non-conflict, and served for some years, and her son, my oldest nephew Michael Larson, and Michelle Larson's my sister, Michael Larson, he served in the army but as a chef out at Holsworthy. And so I often think now whether his sons will take up the service and the continuation of the service in the family. By paying tribute to my family, I'm acknowledging all men and women who made the supreme sacrifice to serve our country and returned, or did not return, and those who kept the home fires burning, as the Honourable Linda Volz talked about in her presentation earlier. I'm proud of the society that we represent today and the society born of their sacrifice in the century of nation building and their honour that followed, a community of people who are both diverse and united. Madam Deputy President, last month I, along with the Minister for Veterans Affairs, David Elliott, took samples of soil from the Redfern War Memorial and the Anzac Obelisk in Moore Park. And I note the Honourable Linda Volz's contribution about the relocation of that obelisk, and that's something that wasn't easy to do, but I will make one positive comment about it. It has spontaneously generated a service there on Anzac Day that wasn't happening when it was in the middle of the road from the Paddington RSL. So the Paddington RSL has embraced the relocation because they can do a service at that obelisk. So in a sense, it has regenerated its relevance to that the grounds where, as the Honourable Linda Volz said, where men camped before they were dispatched to war. And it's a beautiful setting where it's been relocated, not far from the road. Soldiers from across the Sydney region who answered the call to fight in the Great War will be honoured as part of the moving artwork in the Anzac Memorial in Sydney's Hyde Park. Those who have served will be honoured by taking a sample of soil and placing it in the Hall of Service at the refurbished Anzac Memorial so they can be appreciated and commemorated by generations to come. The Anzac Centenary Project soil collection is part of the New South Wales Government's upgrade of the Anzac Memorial Hyde Park during the centenary of Anzac. This is a very exciting project, Madam Deputy President, and one that's very inspiring to me because as a council in the City of Sydney, we looked at ways to complete the Anzac Memorial there, which was never finished because of funds, and that's been finished now and in fact enhanced and added to. And so it's a very exciting project to commemorate the centenary of the armistice. Soil samples from more than 1,600 sites across New South Wales where young soldiers were enlisted to fight are being collected as part of the Anzac Memorial Centenary Soil Collection Project. All soil samples will be placed in the renovated Hall of Service with the name of the town next to them. It was a privilege to be involved in these two important ceremonies to commemorate the sacrifice of those who served their country and contributed to the Anzac legacy. Many Australian soldiers who enlisted to serve our country in World War I came from Sydney, and the New South Wales Government wants to make sure we are commemorating all of their contribution. Diggers from across the Sydney region have made enormous sacrifices for Australian foreign conflicts, and it's vital that we continue the Anzac spirit and remember their sacrifice. Madam Deputy President, as Australia marks the 100th anniversary of the First World War, the Government is enhancing the Anzac Memorial. The Centenary Project will be the enduring legacy of the New South Wales commemorations, and it will realise the vision of the original architect Bruce Dellett and introduce some new spaces where interpretive education classes can occur. Work did not proceed on Bruce Dellett's plans for the water cascade, which is on the Liverpool Street side of the memorial, due to the financial constraints of the Great Depression in the 1930s. As we commemorate the centenary of Anzac, New South Wales is presented with the perfect opportunity to complete Dellett's vision in time for the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War. The centenary project will allow the memorial to tell the stories of New South Wales' involvement in all wars and peacekeeping missions and honour those who have served. This project was made possible by a $20.3 million contribution from the New South Wales Government and $19.6 million from the Commonwealth's Anzac Centenary Public Fund, and the City of Sydney has spent $3.4 million upgrading the existing pool of reflection, which has been completed and looks amazing, and an additional $4.1 million on associated works in Hyde Park around the memorial precinct. To be completed as the centenary of Anzac draws to the close, the centenary project will be a respectful addition to the Anzac Memorial and introduce stunning new features which will serve to enhance the memorial's reputation as the New South Wales landmark. The project is expected to be completed as the centenary of Anzac Commemorations draw to close in 2018. I'd like to just briefly turn to an important event held at the Anzac Memorial, being the visit of the French President Macron. French President Emmanuel Macron visited the memorial on the 2nd of May, and he told a commemorative ceremony. He was at a commemorative ceremony there with 3 Australians who fought in France who were awarded the Legion d'Honneur, and he said that no distance is too far for those who carry deep in their hearts the painful privileged memory of brotherhood in arms. I might continue to quote the President. He said, "We will answer the call every time we need each other." Mr Macron told the event at the Sydney Anzac Memorial in Hyde Park on the 2nd of May, where he hailed the Australian contribution to the Allied cause in 2 world wars. Walking in their footsteps is about fighting terrorism side by side. We will answer the call every time we need each other, Mr Macron said. He hailed Australia's contribution to the Allied causes in 2 world wars. Walking in their footsteps is about fighting terrorism side by side, as we are doing in the Levant, and together taking action against the financing of terror. So he's brought it to the relevancy of today. It's about building over the next 50 years an outstanding strategic partnership that enables us to defend together our idea of law, freedom and sovereignty. It's about refusing to stand by powerlessly when those untold sorrow is inflicted on men, women and children in Syria with chemical weapons that the international community believes it had banished at the time of the Great War. And the Prime Minister who attended that ceremony told the audience that the 2 nations that have fought and bled and died together will stay together. And of course the Premier Gladys Berejiklian was there, and she read the World War I poem In Flanders Fields. Mr Macron awarded the Legion d'Honneur, the highest military honour France awards to those who are not French nationals, to 3 British servicemen who migrated to Australia after the war. He bestowed them on Louis Solomons, who's 101, Bill Mackay, who was 93, and Norman Saunders, who was 91, for their roles in the liberation of France, who were all 3 involved in the D-Day landings of 1944 and the immediate follow-up. What a great honour that he did that. Veterans barely into adult, he said, veterans barely into adulthood who are already heroes, Mr Macron told the 3 men. In his address, he said the pupils of Brenly Lycée in Amiens, which is where he's from, a dozen of whom had been brought by the French government to the ceremony in Hyde Park, where they read out letters from World War I veterans, had travelled back down the road taken by 313,000 Australian soldiers to the Western Front over 100 years. 60,000 never came back, more than 11,000 fell in France, and they lay in rest in our soil today. We will never forget them, he said. It was a great honour that he was there on that day. I do, though, want to just make an observation, and don't want to end on a negative note, but I want to make a quick observation that the Anzac Memorial was dedicated to the fight for freedom and those who sacrificed it all. And I was disappointed that when I went merely as a civilian to attend that ceremony, or to observe that ceremony on the 2nd of May, that the park was closed and that there were police horses barring the public, the ordinary public, from going into the park to observe the French President and the Australian Prime Minister observing our great partnership and our sacrifice together. And I don't think that's in the spirit of why it was built. And so whilst I recognise we have issues around threats and security, I think we've got to always be vigilant to protect the liberties that we fought that the sacrifice was fought for. So I just make that observation, and I think it was a lost opportunity to invite the public, in a managed security sense, to observe that important ceremony. It was closed to the public, and it just seems to me to defy the spirit of the Anzac Memorial to do that. With those few words, Madam Deputy President, I commend the motion to the House. I thank the Honourable Ben Franklin for bringing it to the House's observation. The other speakers have spoken, and so lest we forget.